We are a growing global movement of over 50,000 young people. The Youth in Landscapes Initiative was born when a group of forestry students and young agricultural professionals came together, recognizing the need to combine forces and give voice to youth working in landscapes around the world. 6 years on, we are a thriving and diverse community offering workshops, mentorship, training, and networking. Whether online or in person, the Youth in Landscapes Initiative programs connect, support, and inspire young people to step into courageous leadership, a leadership that breaks barriers and brings people together to act differently. Join the community, be part of the change.
Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Hanata Koh Alvarenga. I'm from Brazil and I'm one of your hosts for the Youth Daily Show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua Barakini from Lagos, Nigeria, and we are so excited for the second day of the Youth Daily Show.
On behalf of the Youth in Landscapes Initiative and the Global Landscapes Forum, we are sending out a huge welcome to all of you, and we're also sending out our warmest wishes for health and safety in these challenging times of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, today we're here to explore together with all of you the concept of right to food, innovations, technologies, and sovereignty. I'm very excited to find out more about the potentials of new innovations to support local food sovereignty and facilitate global food security by tackling weaknesses and injustices embedded in the current food systems. I would also like to invite you all to go on Slido and enter the code hashtag GLF Bonn 2020. The code is hashtag GLF Bonn 2020. Click on youth and let us know what are the biggest threats you can see for food security and food sovereignty in your country of origin.
In the next 30 minutes, we'll have the chance to explore with the help of amazing young experts how we can create a future that will guarantee the right of food to everyone.
Yes, that's going to be very great. We also want to hear from you, our audience. So please use the hashtag Generation Restoration and hashtag GLF Bonn to share on your social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And without further ado, let's give the stage to our panelists.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabine. I'm a conservationist from Mexico, and today I will be the moderator of this amazing panel. We are very happy to have with us Claire Nasique and Varun Deshpande, and to discuss the role of the new technologies and innovations can have in designing an environmentally and socially just food system. The ongoing pandemic has brought to light how frail and unprepared our current food system is towards addressing the shifting consumption patterns, while a growing number of cities have become dependent on food banks. Farmers worldwide are destroying excess produce, meat, and dairy. As explained by Dr. Raj Patel, when one big supply chain runs everything, the whole system becomes fragile. Today, we face new challenges in order to prevent mass hunger and to protect the ecosystems we depend on. New technologies such as gene editing, synthetic food production, or microalgae bioreactors have developed novel ways to produce food on a massive scale. However, scholars such as Nobel laureate Amartya Sen defend that famine is rarely caused by a lack of food production, but by unequal distribution and societal inequities. Numerous scholars fear that new food technologies may further concentrate ownership and control over food systems and threaten food sovereignty. We know that the right of food is and should be a human right to protect the fundamental right of all individuals to feed themselves and dignities. But how can we make sure innovations and technologies, along with traditional systems, help us set the foundations for a future with no hunger? So without further ado, let's meet our speakers. So we have here Claire Nasique. And well, Claire, I know that you work closely with education and ecological farming in Kenya. Would you like to introduce yourself and share with us your inspiring work?
Thank you so much, Sabine. My name is Claire Nasique Akelo. I work as a food campaigner at Greenpeace Africa, and I'm also the founder of the Hummingbird Foundation. So basically my work with Greenpeace Africa involves around encouraging farmers to grow food ecologically. This is locally relevant food that they identify with in line with nature and biodiversity. Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you so much. And we have also Varun. I know that you're working closely with new technologies and food production. Would you like to introduce yourself to Varun?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sabine. It's great to be here at the Global Landscapes Forum Bonn Digital Conference 2020. My name is Varun Deshpande. I run as the Managing Director the Good Food Institute India. We're a global nonprofit with offices all over the world, and we focus on accelerating the exciting new sector of alternative protein, plant-based, cultivated, fermented meat, eggs, and dairy, in order to create a better world, which doesn't have as much negative effects on the planet, on scarce biodiversity, natural resources, etc.
Thank you. This is amazing. Thank you for your great work. So now we're moving on to the questions. How can traditional farming practices and new technologies address the growing concern of negative externalities in the current food system, such as toxins in the food and environmental concerns? We could start with you, Nasike.
Thank you for that question, Sabine. I think when you look at the negative externalities that we are currently experiencing with the current food system, we are looking at control of our food system by multinational corporations. We are looking at toxins in our food systems. So when you talk about traditional food systems and how they can help us curb these negative externalities, we need to look at having our farmers control the seed, not multinational corporations control the seed, in the sense that these farmers can be able to produce food at any given time. They don't have to depend on someone to send them the food from a different country and such like thing. So when we embrace traditional farming practices, that means that we are able to have our farmers then control our food system, because they're basically the producers of the food that we currently consume. And then when you look at also minimization of toxins, some of these traditional farming systems do not encourage the use of pesticides, the use of chemical fertilizers. So when we embrace traditional farming techniques, then that means that we are also growing food in an ecological way. We are growing food that is in relation to nature. We are encouraging biodiversity to thrive on the farm. We're not threatening biodiversity by the use of harmful agrochemicals. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And so for you, Varun, I would like to hear your opinion too.
Thank you so much, Sabine. So actually, we see our work at the Good Food Institute globally as complementary to the excellent work and leadership being undertaken by people like Nasike. We chose the problem of industrial animal agriculture to focus on because it does have tremendously negative externalities on the world, right? And the reasons for this are very simple. The thirst or the hunger for meat and eggs and dairy over the last decades has grown extremely large and will continue to grow over the next decades. And the way that people are looking to satisfy this is through an increasing industrialization of animal protein supply. So the pact that we've had with nature over the last decades, when it comes to extracting resources from nature, has just become an escalation of extraction over time, right? So you take a chicken and grow it in a concentrated animal feeding operation as a large corporation, you have to feed it 9 calories of input to give you 1 calorie of output in the form of meat. And chickens are the most efficient factory farmed or industrial animal farmed meat. Cows are way worse than that. Pigs are worse. Some fish are worse, depending on the pig. So you have these tremendously negative externalities, including food insecurity. You have to use vast swaths of land, vast quantities of water, encroach on the Amazon, encroach on forests in Indonesia, inevitably in places like India and sub-Saharan Africa as well over time. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, let's create slaughter-free meat so that the meat supply, the protein supply of the world can get out of the way of indigenous populations, so that we are not having as much of an extractive power on the planet. And we absolutely cannot afford to continue producing meat, eggs, and dairy the way that it's produced right now. This has to be an essential complement to sovereignty movements, because we have to get away from encroaching and infringing on people's lives in the way that we're doing right now. And we have to do it in a practical way to still satisfy that meat and protein demand over the next decades.
Thank you. I love how you mix both topics, like your Nasik and your part. Well, moving to the next question. How can traditional farming practices and new innovations support local food sovereignty and facilitate global food security by tackling the weaknesses and injustices embedded in the current food systems? We can start now with you, Varun.
So this is a great question, and this is what excites me personally about the alternative protein sector, Sabine. So right now, what's happening in that sector, and I'm sure people can follow the news and read all of the investments and all of the corporate stuff that's happening. And I should say, especially on the entrepreneurial side, it is genuinely having a huge impact on the planet. So for example, Americans eat 3 beef burgers every week, which are pretty much all of them are factory farmed beef burgers, which is really, really bad for the environment and for soy being produced in places like Brazil, being used as feed for those cows, et cetera, et cetera. A company like Beyond Meat, which makes plant-based beef burgers that taste the same or better and eventually cost the same or less. If you switch out just one of those 3 beef burgers in the US, then you would be doing the equivalent of taking 12.2 million cars off the road or powering 2.3 million additional homes. Now that's great, right? But what we want moving forward is to accelerate the transition of these technologies in this sector to actually make sure that we're catering to indigenous populations, smallholder farmers as well. So out into the future, we both want to make sure that the footprint of the meat industry at a large scale is so small that it doesn't encroach on people's livelihoods as much anymore, but also provide the same technologies to those people in a way that isn't owned by anyone, that can be taken forward by those people to produce resources for themselves if they so choose.
Great. Okay, so can we have your opinion too, Claire, from the ecological farming point?
I think like new innovations that are coming up, in particularly in food systems, they need to address the issue of localization of farming systems. We need to encourage local farmers to be able to produce more food that is locally relevant. When we talk about food insecurity, so we're talking about food insecurity, but then farmers are not able to produce food at a local scale, then that becomes problematic. So innovations that come on board, particularly in the food systems, they need to encourage localization of farming, encourage farmers to produce food, encourage them to grow food that is locally relevant, not food that is alien to a farmer. So when you tell them, okay, grow this, and they don't identify that as food. So we need to be able to encourage farmers to grow the kind of foods that they can identify with in their community. So when we do that, then we're talking of beating food insecurity. But until we do that, then we'll still have the cases of countries and communities being food insecure. And then the other thing, as I had said initially, is that we need also to encourage farmers to share seeds amongst each other. Like now we have the COVID-19 pandemic, and some farmers are not able to produce food because they don't have access to seed. So when you make the seed available, and this is local seed that grows in a particular climate where the farmers are actually located, then it becomes easier for this farmer to produce food. So when you're talking about food insecurity in that particular community, then it's something that is not happening there because farmers are growing food. That food is consumed in those local areas. So different communities across the world then are able to feed themselves instead of depending on a certain country to feed, to grow food and then import to a different country. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your answer. You're introducing a very important topic of food security, and I would love to discuss that further, but it's going to be related with the next question. So the current pandemic has shown us that our food system is deeply dependent on supply chains that are likely to be disrupted by unexpected events that could potentially alter production and consumption patterns. So to what extent can traditional farming practices and new technologies adapt to a changing climate that is likely to bring unexpected floods, droughts, and plagues? So we can start with you again, Nasik.
Okay, and I think that's very interesting. just looking at what has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, like countries have closed borders to limit the spread of COVID-19. So that means that if you used to depend on a certain country for food, then chances are you're not getting that food anymore. So with the traditional farming systems and agricultural innovations that come on board, they need to embrace one particular aspect of food and seed sovereignty, in the sense that these systems are resilient. When you're talking about food and seed systems, these systems are resilient. They can be able to withstand different climatic changes. You're talking about embracing diversity within the system. So you're not just growing maize and corn, as it's called in other parts of the country. You're growing diverse kind of foods on your farm. You're growing millet, you're growing sorghum, you're growing different kind of crops. So even if one crop is going to die as a result of drought, then you're certainly going to have at least something for you to be able to eat. Then that talks about resilience, so your food system is resilience in that you're not losing everything on your farm, but at least you still have something to take home and eat. And that's what we need to encourage the technologies that are coming into food systems to look at. We need to encourage them to look at seed and food sovereignty, to encourage our farmers to produce food in the way they know how to, rather than imposing on them ways in which they can produce food, like forcing farmers to take, agrochemicals, forcing farmers to buy chemical fertilizers when it's evident that those farmers cannot afford it. And then farmers end up being embroiled in like loans because they have to take loans to be able to afford some of these things like the agricultural inputs. We need to teach them how to grow food the way they know how to, which is the traditional way. Use the seeds they can afford, the seeds that they can easily find. Yeah, so I think the traditional farming systems are very resilient in regards to embracing diversity, having various diverse kind of crops on the farm. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, I can see that in Mexico, like how traditional farmers are still having like where to sell and and their market is not as disrupted. Okay, so we can go with you, Varun, for the same question.
This is such an excellent question. And as I said earlier, this is the kind of thing that gets me excited about the alternative protein sector. All the investments and all the entrepreneurship and all of that stuff is great. And if you'll excuse the term, it's sexy. But if we're looking out into the future, I mentioned we need to feed 10 billion people by 2050. And that doesn't mean we need to force food down their throats. It means that we need to think of consumer cohorts, and we need to also think of producer cohorts, right? In places like India, we have 130 million farmers, right? They form over half the population is dependent directly on agriculture in terms of the farmer family cohort. And so Nasiki mentioned sorghum and millets, which I really love. That's a really important crop or a class of crops in India and in sub-Saharan Africa and other places. We need to enable bottom-up models that make a lot of sense, both for the areas of diet diversity and creating lots of fruits and veg, lots of wisdom that can be brought to the fore from those farmer cohorts. What we focus on directly is the protein piece of this, right? So we're seeing hugely rising meat demand in countries like India also, where you might have assumed that people are vegetarian, but actually the constraint is income of being able to consume meat, eggs, and dairy. And so if we're able to create bottom-up opportunities to farm and locally consume rather than having to go and buy meat, eggs, and dairy, and without breaking the planet, that's what we're going to try and do. So really just quickly to round off, there are companies around the world now that are looking at being able to produce protein in a 2-acre facility that would actually take 700 or 7,000 acres of land to raise cows to produce the same amount of protein. Now, can we put the lens of cost competitiveness and opening up technology, open access technology, so anyone can take that technology and move forward and create the way they want to with it? That, I think, is the open question within our sector, so that people don't own this moving forward unilaterally.
Great, thank you so much. Well, now we're going to have some time for the questions from the audience. And I have a couple in here that someone selected. Okay, so the first one is, what is the best way to convey sustainable messages through different generations. What role does food have in it? We can start with you, Natik.
I think different generations have a role to play in food production and also food consumption. And like they say, food enlivens our culture. Food eating is part of our culture. So if we as the young generation can learn the nitty-gritties of food production, and not just food production, but sustainable food production from the older generation, then we are likely to pass this on to the other generation that is coming after us. So we need to be able to learn from our grandmothers. We need to be able to learn from the smallholder farmers who live nearby us, the smallholder farmers who bring their produce to the market each and every time. So when we interact with them, that's the easiest way for us to learn on how to produce food. But if we don't interact with them, then chances are that we are going to get a different understanding of agriculture, which is not in line with producing food in an ecological way, which then we end up passing to our generation, and then it ends up harming our environment, which sustains us, and that is the thing that we need to aim at protecting. So as we even look at food systems, we need to look at these food systems. How are they producing food in line with the environment? Are we learning this from the right people, or are we letting multinational corporations send that information, from top to bottom? But we need to learn from the bottom, like Varun initially said. We need to learn from the farmers. What are some of the tricks they do when it comes to climate change? How are they able to combat climate change in their respective villages, in those small villages in India, in Kenya? We need to be able to learn from those farmers. What are the sustainable ways of producing food? And farmers have done this since time immemorial. The traditional farming systems have fed us since time immemorial. And if you look at Kenya, the amount of food we produce, like 80% of it is produced by the smallholder farmers in Kenya. That means we need to be able to encourage them to produce more, and we need to learn from them. We need to learn how they produce the food in an environmentally and sustainable way. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I think the next one is going to be great for Varun. Okay, so do you think vegan diets and alternative meats compete with indigenous food sovereignty movements?
It's a great question. And that's actually what I'm here to say, is that these are very complementary with each other, right? So you literally need 9 times less land, 9 times less water, 9 times less chemical inputs. You don't have to feed chickens in a feedlot, transport them to a slaughterhouse, do all of these steps that result in 40 times more carbon dioxide being emitted per calorie of protein from chickens than lentils. It's actually 40 to 60, depending on which life cycle analysis you use, right? That's a huge impact on the environment. Switching to plant-based diets that give consumers and producers what they want on the basis of things that matter to them. So for me as a consumer, if I care about eating chicken, I want something to taste the same or better and cost the same or less. We have that option now, which we've never had in history. So you're seeing the takeoff of vegan diets and plant-based and all of that stuff. And I obviously cannot guarantee that everyone is going to implement this in a way that is not extractive, right? We have to keep our guard up and continue to work towards a better future, even within this sphere. But if we're talking about, is this orders of magnitude better than what the world currently does to produce meat, eggs, and dairy? Yes, it absolutely is, which means we're trying to get to a world which is inherently better and which completely steps off infringing on people's lives so much. So I think we're getting towards places where we can move towards a better world, which is deeply encouraging. As I said earlier, we have to apply lenses even now, as soon as we can, of cost and taste for the highest bar possible for people in India, for people in sub-Saharan Africa, as that meat demand continues to go up in these areas.
Thank you very much for your answer. Nasika, would you like to answer that question too?
I think Varun has answered it exhaustively, but just to add slightly is that veganism and food sovereignty coexists. You can be a vegan, but you are still promoting food and seed sovereignty, in that you are encouraging the consumption of locally vegan diets that are found in your area. And that's in that way, you're still a vegan, but you're advocating for food sovereignty. You're giving the local farmers a chance to keep producing what they know best and how to produce. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. And we have a last one. Okay. So the current, let me, if I understand this question. So the coronavirus pandemic has created lockdowns, and we are also having increasing floods and increasing a locust problem in Africa, as you are very aware of it. And so all of this has been affecting the agriculture seasons massively. So how can we tackle food insecurity in India under such circumstances? And I think it's going for you, Varun.
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have? This is a massive challenge, and it's absolutely heartbreaking, right? So we're seeing farmers that are unable to go out into their fields, that are not sure if they will be able to find buyers for their produce. We're seeing huge attention on the problem right now from governments, from civil society, etc. We're seeing, by the way, these millions upon millions of migrant workers that are stranded, walking thousands of miles across state lines to get home because they've been in cities like Mumbai, and now they have no jobs because the country's been locked down. From an agricultural standpoint, this is a reset moment. We have to rethink everything. Nasike mentioned this earlier, right? Like, we have to think of bottom-up solutions. We have to consult with farmer-producer organizations, associations, with farmers directly, and think through what are the incentives involved with having a food system now that actually produces everything, right? So from fruits and vegetables to pulses to staple cereal grains, all the way up to meat, eggs, and dairy, and replacements for those products, as I'm talking about. Now, there's many things that are being done in this area, but I think reducing the dependence on international supply chains is definitely one. Looking at bottom-up models of production that enable transactions directly between farmers and cities is another. And some of these things are being implemented as we speak. Regulations are being unwound that have disadvantaged farmers for generations, and I think that's great. But this is a huge topic and a huge problem. And I think it's going to persist for some time into the future. We need more people working on these problems. That's why we're here today, to talk about them.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, I agree. I would love to keep on discussing about all these subjects, but I'm afraid it's time to conclude. So I want to thank you. This has been a great panel. Thank you, Nasike and Varun. You shared a really great contribution that shed light upon the challenges of our current food system. And I just want to conclude that I leave this panel inspired to know that there are solutions, that they already exist. However, we do have to work so that the solutions become more the norm and not the exception. And I would like to ask for both of you to leave us with a call to action. So what is, in one short sentence, your wish and dream for the future of food? So we can start with you, Varun, if you want.
So my dream and our dream at the Good Food Institute is to set up a protein supply chain for the future. And that could be anything that people want to eat, locally, internationally, etc. That doesn't have the same negative impacts, that doesn't involve filthy industrialized slaughter and pandemics and all of these issues. In order to get there, we have to do a lot of the work that we've discussed in this session, right? What's happening internationally is going to continue happening in terms of the investments and all of that sexy stuff, but we need way more people working on this problem who can drive down the costs, who can create decentralized methods of producing these same foods, and who can take this into the future in an inclusive way. That's my dream.
Beautiful. Okay, so for you, Nasike, what's your dream?
I think when it comes to the future of food, my dream is about us being able to grow food in a way that protects biodiversity and nature. We need to have policies that are formulated that encourage farmers to grow food in an ecological way. Farmers also need to be supported. They need to be supported by us consumers. When we buy food from them, food that they have produced ecologically, then we encourage them to produce even more. So my dream is that we are able to feed ourselves, but at the same time, we're able to protect our environment, because without the environment, we won't exist. The environment gives us water, it gives us air, it gives us the soil in which we grow the very food that we consume. So we need to protect our biodiversity. If it's underneath, if it's in the air, we need to protect everything. We need to protect our biodiversity, and for us to be able to produce food in a sustainable and an ecological way. That's my dream for food.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again for you both. You gave great insights about the subject. And thank you all the audience for being here with us. So we are the generation to build a better future for people and the planet. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And
Go ahead, Joshua.
yeah, this was such an inspiring discussion. Young people working for a future that will leave no one behind, and taking into consideration smallhold farmers and traditional knowledge when designing new technologies can definitely facilitate that.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to send out a huge thanks to Sabine, Nasike, and Varun for the great discussion. I'm definitely very inspired after this great session. And it's important to remember that the future of food systems need to be just for the people and respectful towards the planet. So that we can actually finally alter the current route we're in terms of the climate crisis we're facing. So before we end today's session, I would just love to share with you the results from our Slido question that we mentioned earlier in the session. And you can see here now on the screen. So the question was, what are the biggest threats you can see for food security and food sovereignty in your country of origin? So I see there's quite a lot of phrases there and words that remind you of the biggest threats in your different countries. So I see that government support is one big one, high cost of inputs, water crisis, droughts, agrarian, so soil erosion. So there's a lot of the climate change issues, that the effects of climate change basically in your different countries. But also there's a lot about the economy, so price, poor market infrastructure, innovation, quantity over quality. So it's interesting to see the different patterns that we see for your different countries. Of course, we heard about some countries here, Kenya, India, and I did hear a little bit about my country, about Brazil. But please do keep sharing about the situation in your different countries. Joshua, do you have any comments on the Slido question? If not, we'll just thank you once again for joining us for the Youth Daily Show on the second day. So for those of you that attended yesterday, we had a great discussion about vegan food and local food. And today's the second day, and tomorrow we have the last day. So we're reaching the end, but I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. And don't forget to continue sharing your thoughts about the event through social media using the hashtags Generation Restoration and hashtag GLF Bonn 2020. And now we would also like to invite you to stay tuned for a documentary screening that will take place right now after this. We have documentary makers Michael Du and Justine Davy, who traveled to the island of Negros Oriental in the Philippines to meet with community members who are making impressive efforts to protect and restore their mangrove ecosystems. And this session is going to be a chance for you to immerse yourself in this ecologically critical yet often forgotten realm of American mangrove forests, minus all the bugs and mud. But yeah, it was a pleasure to have all of you with us here today. And I'll see you tomorrow for the third and final day of the Youth Daily Show. It's going to be very exciting, so I'll see you there.